That was thousands of people that were rooting for her, praying for her, and yet the cancer beat her body, and her body died. And for me, the carnage, in my spiritual life was that my prayer life suffered, because I just thought, why would I pray if the Lord's already determined it? He knows what's going to happen. He's set it in motion. What's the point of praying?
Welcome to this week's episode of the His Hill Podcast. My name is Kelly Doherty, and I'm your host. I apologize, my voice not being in the top shape right now. I'm up at Timberline Lodge in one of our Torchbearers centers in Fraser, Colorado, and teaching here for the week. And I'm a little under the weather, but it's good enough to talk, so I'm going to do it. And the good thing is you're not going to have to just listen to my voice in this episode. I have with me Joseph Weissman, who is the Assistant Director here at Timberline. I've known Joseph since he was a kid, and so this is fun for me to sit down and have a conversation with him. You maybe recognize the last name Weissman. His father has been on the podcast a couple of times. He gave his testimony with us back in February of 2022. If you haven't heard that, I encourage you to go back and listen to that one. And then he's also given us a devotion a few weeks after that. So if you're interested, and I encourage you to, go back and listen to that as well. But anyway, Joseph, thanks for being with us.
Glad to be here, Kelly. Thanks for asking.
Oh, well, I really appreciate you doing this. I didn't know that I was going to be sick, and so it's even a bigger bonus for me that I'm not trying to figure out how to do something here and to do all the talking. So
happy to be here.
I do appreciate it. Joseph, man, I was thinking about it the other day, just wondering how many years I've known you. I know you must have been, first time I met you, you must have been, 9 years old, growing up at Ravencrest,
yep.
Another Torchbearers center in Colorado, where your dad, Wayne, was at that time the assistant director, who eventually became the director.
That's
there.
right.
But so is that were you born there?
I was basically born there. I was born in Denver because they didn't have anywhere for my mom to give birth at the hospital in Estes, so we went to Denver, but born and raised basically at the Torchbearers Center.
Okay, there at Ravencrest.
Yeah.
What was it like for you growing up at a Torchbearers Center?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say I was probably 8 or 9 when you met me, because that's how old my oldest is. William is 9, and he's currently running around campus here, hanging out with students and living basically the same life that I got to live growing up at Ravencrest. So when I think back at my years growing up at Ravencrest, I cannot imagine a better context to grow up, to know the Lord in, and to experience all the things that Colorado has to offer a young boy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really. Yeah, you. That was an observation of mine watching you over the years, that you really took advantage of growing up, in a more rural area in the mountains. And one of the unique things about you, and you probably know what I'm going to bring up, that I always thought was so interesting about you, is that you got to where you just lived outside. You slept outside.
I did, yes. Yeah, for about 2 years. It's hard to remember exactly how it started. I think we spent a night as kids out on our front deck, and I just enjoyed it so much. It went from one night to a couple nights that week, and just loved being out under the stars, and ended up basically sleeping outside for 2 years under the stars.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I can remember going to visit, and there'd be a mattress out in the front yard. That was your bedroom.
There's some memories out there.
I remember you coming with your dad to His Hill one time when he was coming for a week of teaching, and he requested a mattress for you to put outside.
So
really
it's funny how when you're that age, you start for one reason and then you carry on for other reasons. So I was, as a young man in some ways wanting to prove myself, and so I started for the pure joy of it. But eventually, I got a reputation for it.
Okay.
And so of course there's that aspect internally where, I want to be out there. I enjoy it, but I also feel like to a degree I have to, because that's what people think of and know of me. And I didn't actually remember that I had done it even when I traveled with my dad. But it is a special thing when I think back on that part of my childhood.
How many siblings do you have?
3.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were all pretty close.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. 2 years apart.
Okay. And what was family life like for you? It is different because we raised our family as staff in a Torchbearers center. So what was it like from
Yep.
you being a child, your perspective?
Yeah, family life at Ravencrest. I mean, it was very melded together with ministry life, family life, and ministry life. There wasn't. We didn't try to keep it compartmentalized. It was very much together, and I really appreciate that, thinking back on it, and even now as I raise my kids at a Torchbearers center. But we were homeschooled. I was homeschooled all the way through, as well as my older sister Rachel, and so we would do school in the mornings, and then oftentimes once I got old enough to head over to Ravencrest after I finished school, I would either go over and hang out and play with students or sit in the office and talk with staff, which now looking back, it's like, I don't know how they let me just sit in there and talk their ear off, I'm sure, while they're trying to get things done. Or I would just head out into the back 40, which is the acreage that Ravencrest had, and just explore. So it was such a dream of a childhood, and family life was very much, kind of as good as you can imagine it, with my parents both being very involved in our kids' in our lives, shepherding us, teaching us school, spending time with us on the weekends and the evenings, and just good. When I think back, it's hard to identify anything in my upbringing that was hard, difficult, painful.
When did you come to know Christ?
I came to know Christ when I had croup. I don't even know exactly how old I was, 6 or 7, but I had croup. I was sick, and somehow the croup put the fear of God in me, because I was afraid I was going to die. And so I remember my mom coming in and comforting me, and of course I knew what they believed, what our family believed, but I wanted to know that it was true, and know that I could have it for myself. So it wasn't quite a turn and burn message, but it was pretty close.
Okay. And what was it like, being a believer in a setting like that with your dad on staff as assistant director, then later director? Did you feel any pressure from that?
I really didn't. I think some of my other siblings did in various ways, but I didn't ever feel that I could identify like a performance pressure.
Okay.
It was a very carefree and life-giving environment that my parents created, and that the Ravencrest staff and students created for me to enjoy. So I couldn't say I ever had a period of time where I felt that kind of performance pressure that I think you're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Did growing up there help you at all in thinking through, what you wanted to do in life?
I probably, like most kids, went through different stages of what I wanted to be when I grew up. But I can remember, so at Ravencrest, we had this big map that had all the Torchbearers centers on it. And I can remember as a kid, I couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 when I first decided I'm going to go to New Zealand for Bible school. And so that was my first kind of shaping time in terms of what I was going to do in my future. And I think I knew somewhere deep down that I would be blessed and grateful if I could be in the kind of ministry and work that my parents were doing. Okay. So I had different ideas of wanting to be a musician, wanting to be a school teacher. But eventually, when I was on staff, down the road, when I was 23, I think, when I ended up being on staff for a year in New Zealand after being a Bible school student, that I really realized I think the Lord's going to give me the opportunity to be a Torchbearer staff.
Did you, now you didn't, after graduating high school, what did you do? You didn't go straight to, well, no, because you said you were 23.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what
I graduated when I was 17 from high school and went straight to Montevideo in New Zealand as a student.
Okay.
So I did my gap year down there, and then came home for a bit, worked, and then got a phone call from Dale Epp in the South Island, who wanted me to come on staff. So I attended school in the North Island, and then worked in the South Island.
How long were you there?
I was there for really just one school year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a center that's not, there's not a center anymore
right.
there, but it was a pretty unique center, I feel like.
It was.
Yeah, it was a small bed and breakfast, I guess, is what it originally was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was on the south side. It was a small school because it could only handle a small number.
We had 15
right.
the year I was there.
Yeah. And we've had, here at His Hill, we've had a number of students come from that center. It was called The Crossing.
Yeah.
To come to His Hill as second-year students.
Yeah.
So and it just seemed like it was a really neat program. That just judging by those students who came to us.
And you guys have connections over the years with the Epps who ran that school there at His Hill.
Yeah, they were on staff with us at His Hill, and then they were students there as well. Yeah, Dale was actually here or at His Hill a couple of weeks ago as a guest lecturer. So it's really neat couple. Well, what was the Lord? What was He doing in your life during all that time? I mean, you had finished. When you became a believer at a young age, and was there a moment in time when you came to realize that Christ is your life, and what kind of change was that for you?
Yeah, I was thinking about that just leading up to our time together, and when I think about my testimony, the story that the Lord's given me. There is a quote actually from Major Ian Thomas that comes to mind because he talks about, or a phrase that he used, he would talk about being evangelically house trained. And I think about my life growing up at Ravencrest in this beautiful context. I really had everything going for me. And I can see at that time that the Lord was using the environment. He was using my parents and the staff at Ravencrest and the students in a lot of ways to shape me in my faith. And at the same time, there's the reality that when you are in that kind of context, a very Christian context, that the path of least resistance is Christian behavior.
Okay.
And so I can identify through a lot of years of my life this not I wouldn't say a two-faced kind of thing going on. A lot of our students come here and share about having, they're kind of one way with their parents and one way at school and one way at church. And I don't see that, but I do see this wrestling between the flesh and the spirit. And it's just interesting because the flesh actually wanted Christian behavior, and the spirit wanted, spirit-filled living. But externally, it's hard to tell the difference for people that knew me and were around me. And so that was an interesting part of my early journey and honestly continued all the way through until today, because the truth is I only want to live out of the Christ life. I don't want to act like a Christian. I don't want to behave like a Christian. I want Christ to be my life and for His behavior to be lived out through me. But it's so tempting in the flesh to toggle back to a self-reliant Christian behavior that gets the approval of man. So that's one of the things that I struggled with all through growing up. And I would say where was the time when I really experienced and understood in a personal way that Christ lived in me? I would say it was in degrees. There wasn't one hard-hitting moment or event in my life. I got to see my parents living it out. I got to hear Majorie and Thomas and all the guys who visited Ravencrest and taught. I used to sit in on classes at Ravencrest. I got to hear the message taught. I got to see the students wrestle with it and try to figure it out and try to work it out in their own lives. And then I got to go to Bible school and try to take everything that I had been taught and kind of put it out on the table and sort through it and try to decide for myself, is this the truth? And so it's been in degrees through my life of understanding and comprehending and appropriating that truth. And I hope the Lord brings me deeper and deeper in more and more, greater and greater degrees, I guess I would say.
How has that impact, understanding that Christ is your life, how has that impacted you as a husband and a father?
Yeah, it certainly helps when the Lord puts something in front of you that is so clearly beyond human capability to do well. Lots of people achieve being a husband, being a father, apart from Christ to varying degrees of success. But to actually be a husband the way the Bible calls us to love our wives like Christ loved the church, it's not possible. You just can't do it. And so when you're faced with something that is beyond human capability, that's when, for me, I've been really grateful to see, oh, you know what? I don't have to figure this out. All I have to do is know the Lord Jesus as my life, as my strength, as the husband, and allow him to work uniquely through my personality to care for my wife and love her. And it's the same with kids, even more with kids. There's so many times with 5 kids, currently age 8 is the oldest, down to age 3. So we're out of baby phase, right, for now. But even more so, as a parent, you're faced constantly with your own shortcomings, the shortcomings of your own human capability, your inability to be consistent with your kids, to teach them, to lead them, to discipline them. And Rachel and I have just come to a place where we are grateful for the things that we can't handle as parents, because those are the things that more quickly than the things that we feel like we've got a hang of, it is the things that we can't do that bring us to a reliance on Christ to do.
Yeah, I can identify with that. We can become very comfortable as parents, as a spouse, and it kind of helps you with what James says, to consider it all joy when you encounter various trials. We don't think of those hard times as so often what we want to do is just get through them as quick as we can, or ignore them. But when he's giving that exhortation, consider it all joy when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. I read an illustration one time that I thought really helped with that, because believers struggle with that, being told that there's supposed to be joy in that moment. And so we try to explain it away. I've heard people tell me on several occasions, say, well, joy and happiness are 2 different things. Happiness is an emotion, joy is a state of being. And I said, well, that's interesting, but if you do a word study of this, you find that joy is actually an emotion. And there's not any other passage that I can find in Scripture that uses the same word that we have a problem with it being an emotion.
Yeah.
So what's going on there? And he says, but it's not joy with the pain. It's not joy with the struggle or joy with the
Right.
problem. Consider all joy when you encounter various trials, knowing the testing of your faith produces endurance. And then the big word, let endurance have its perfect result. Let the Lord do what he's doing with this. And what is it? That you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. That you may mature in that completeness in Christ. But the illustration that I read on this one time that was really helpful for me was a story of Michelangelo working on a statue. And so he's chipping away, and a fellow walks by and asks, "What is he doing?" And Michelangelo says, "Well, I'm releasing the angel." And the man says, "What do you mean an angel? This is just a big chunk of rock." And Michelangelo says, "Well, see, that's the difference between you and me. When you look at it, you just see a big chunk of rock, nothing, chaos, no form. When I see it, I see the angel, and I'm just in the process of removing what is not the angel." And I see in this passage in James, well, this is what's going on, where the joy is in the fellowship we have with the Lord in these things, that he is present and he is active at work. And what's he doing? He's removing from us what is not Jesus and leaving us with Christ alone. And so that's what's going on, I think, in these relationships.
Yeah.
When we see I'm not being the husband I'm supposed to be, and as we turn to Christ and we trust him for these things, he's at work in removing what is not Jesus as a husband, as a father. And I kind of feel like that just really, that backs up what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's what makes a good husband. It's what makes a good dad is Christ, at work in us. And as we yield to that, the wonderful things beyond us happen. And you're probably seeing that now too, as a parent with young children. Even now, you're starting to see things in your kids that you just know, this is not from me. This is the Lord's faithfulness in what he's doing.
Oh, yeah.
And I can look at my children now. They're just a little bit younger than you. You guys were all kind of the same age group, and I look at them now, and the things that the decisions they make, the statements they make, the stances they take. I look at that, and I'm just so taken back, thankful, and encouraged in the faithfulness of God found in Christ, knowing that I am imperfect. In the flesh, I can look back on things as a parent and, oh my goodness, I wish I had not done that. But I can look at other things and say, I'm so thankful that I did that, but I know that was the Lord's goodness, working in me. And despite me and my failures, that God is faithful.
That's right.
in the lives of my girls. And so anyway, I don't want to do all the talking here, but you got me fired up on that. You got me excited with that. Okay, so you ended up here at Timberline after, you came back from New Zealand. You were on staff there for a year. And I remember teaching a class there through video and seeing you in the back there.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. But you were done after the year. Did you come straight to Timberline, or what happened?
No, I ended up moving back to Estes, and then enrolled in kind of finishing up college. So I had done some community college work before I went to Cape and Ray, New Zealand, and then between my time as a student and on staff. So I had about 2 years worth of college credits. So when I came back from New Zealand as a staff member, I enrolled as a student at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, and moved down there from Estes after the summer and finished out my bachelor's degree.
And what was that in?
It was in writing. I studied English with a writing emphasis.
Okay.
So it was really just something that I enjoyed. By that time, so the Lord, I think, had showed me pretty clearly while I was in New Zealand as a staff member that I was going to be either in Torchbearers or a similar kind of relational, incarnational ministry. And so I felt like I wanted to finish my degree. My dad had encouraged that. And so I came home and enrolled in college to finish. But really, it didn't matter what I was going to get a degree in. I just pursued what I enjoyed, knowing that the Lord was going to take me into, I think, full-time vocational ministry. So we'll see if he has a plan for that degree sometime in my future. But
it's, when as you were saying that, I've thought about this a lot. When you look at history, you study just like the founding fathers. You look at the beginning of our university system in this country, and you realize that the purpose of going to college, going to a university, the purpose of it was to get an education. It wasn't, and now we say that now, going to get education, but it seems like getting an education has become more of a getting job training, some kind of training so you can get a job. And it's not so much education for the sake of learning, And so when I hear you say that, I think that's probably really profitable.
Yeah, it was. It really was. I think it was learning, and it was learning how to learn.
Yeah.
Regardless of the field. Yep.
And that's healthy. I think it's healthy for us to, whether it's in a formal setting or not, but to be educated, to our mind be engaged in things with the Lord. As believers, we have that privilege that whatever lane we're in, that we get to do this with the Lord. So, to study English, to study writing, and let the Lord work in our hearts with that. I got a degree in religious education. I was telling the guys about it today, the guy students, in a time with them, that I was my plan, and I told them that I realized, I'm 58 now, I've looked over my life here, and I've realized this morning in just kind of final preparations before talking to the guys, I was thinking about my life, and I realized that none of my plans have succeeded. And I can't think of one.
Yeah.
And but it's the Lord that directs our steps. And we may have these plans, but He's the one that's directing our steps. There's a proverb that's close to that. I can't think of the exact wording. And but I had the plan since I was 12 years old to be a music minister or a music pastor. And so when it came time to go to college, I went to a Bible college and I enrolled as a music major. And I'm getting my music degree, and I'm going to be a music pastor. And I was sitting in one of our classes 6 weeks before graduation, and I remember what room it was and what wall I was looking at, and I had this thought just come over me: you took the wrong major.
Oh no!
Oh, what in the world? And oh well, that's what it is, And so a couple of days later, I was in the academic dean's office over some issue. I don't remember what it was, and we were just visiting, and I said something about me getting a music degree. And he turned around and looked at me, and he says, "Kelly, you're not getting a music degree." I thought, what? What do you mean? He says, "Kelly, we don't give music degrees here." And now I'm really starting to feel like an idiot. I'm turning red, and I'm going, wait a minute. And what had happened was the school I was going, it was a school in Arlene's hometown. We were dating, so I decided I'm going to go to school there. And when I got there, they had just become accredited. So, but the year they worked on their accreditation, the man that was in charge of the music department was on sabbatical. And they never told him.
No kidding.
So he didn't realize it until he comes back after his sabbatical. He realizes they're now a degree school, and he doesn't have anything set up for the music program. So he spent that whole year getting everything set up for that. That was the year I came.
Wow.
So nobody explained that to me. And so I just took the music major. And so the academic dean looks at me and says, "Kelly, you're not getting a music degree. You're getting a degree, a bachelor's degree in religious education with an emphasis in music."
Wow.
And I realized this is a double major. I can't believe this. And because that thought I had when I was in that class was that I should have studied more pastoral or teaching and preaching.
Right.
And as I'm talking to him with that, and he tells me that I'm not getting a music degree, I'm getting a bachelor's degree in religious education with an emphasis in music, I realized that's why I had to take all these teaching courses and all these other courses.
No way.
And I was just jumping through the hoops to get a degree. And I didn't. But what that showed me is that, you know, the Lord knew all this. He knew where he was taking me. And, you know, my ideas were not getting in the way.
Mm-hmm.
He was, but he was able to use them in a really unique way, because it was the music that he used to get me into my first position as an associate pastor, but it was the preaching and the teaching that was being largely developed in that place. And then when I came on staff at His Hill, it was for music, to head up music,
Really?
but it was the teaching that became the thing that he was developing and growing. And I just, you know, just how the Lord does these things. And so, you know, now, you know, we've got people that, you know, they go to school. Really, universities become more of I think what we used to call a trade school, except it costs a whole lot more now. And people come out and they don't really know what they're going to do. I know one of my nephews right now is really struggling with it. He can't get a job in the field that he was told this is going to be an excellent degree to get a job in. And so, you know, I just find it refreshing to hear you say that you know, your whole idea with education was, this is what I enjoy. I'm just gonna learn.
Yeah.
So that's neat.
Yeah.
And so with that, okay, so you studied writing, but you end up assistant director at a Torchbearers Center. How did that come to be?
So yeah, as I was finishing up my college degree, I had been kind of in that year, I had been traveling some with Torchbearers, supporting, like, we ran a booth at Dare to Share conferences and a couple different other Christian conventions on behalf of Torchbearers, just to market and share with young people the opportunity of Bible school. And so I was working closely with Dave Firth at that time. And I think I had talked to Dave about just keeping his ear to the ground if there were any opportunities in Torchbearers, as I saw my degree and the end of my college career, you know, in sight. And so I don't actually know everything that happened behind the scenes. I just know that I got a phone call from Dan Thomas, who was at that time the director and the principal at Timberline. And so he called me up when I was in my last semester and said that I was on the short list of potential candidates for the Dean of Students role. Of course, I knew Dan from growing up with him. He's 10 years older than me, but we both grew up at Ravencrest. And so that was kind of the start of it. And I think we ended up having one in-person interview where he drove down from Fraser to Denver, and I drove up from Fort Collins and met him in Denver, and we talked about the role, and I was thrilled at the opportunity, and they ended up offering that to me. And so after I graduated, I moved up to Timberline, but then it was that summer that Torchbearers was doing that conference tour kind of around North America, and so we went, you know, we had one in Wisconsin, Seattle, Abbotsford, and kind of around North America. It was kind of an alumni conference. So I did that over the summer and then came here at the end of the summer and started. It was fall of 2012.
Okay.
That was my first class. So yeah, I came on as Dean of Students kind of with the goal of taking over the principal role from Dan so he could focus on director.
And how long, so you were dean and then you became principal. How long were you principal?
I was principal for about, it was about 6 years. So So dean for, it was about a 2-year transition from dean to principal. And so principal was 5 to 6 years. There's no clear line where I went from dean of students to principal. So dean of students and principal for 7 years. And then about 7 years in, which actually feels pretty recent now, I've been here just over 10 years, Dan asked me to consider taking over operations as the operations director. And so that is really my functional on the ground role and job title. And then assistant director was really added to that only maybe a year and a half ago. So I'm the operations director, and I support Dan as the assistant director. But my on the ground, role is really operations director now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you, after getting here, then you ended up getting married.
I did.
And so that was. How did you guys meet?
Yeah.
You being here on staff, and where's her home?
She's from Kansas City, Missouri.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
So how did you meet her?
It's funny how the Lord works, man, because I had met her years before at through her brother who worked at Ravencrest. So her brother Mark was an intern at Ravencrest, and I got to know him. I think that's back in 2004 that I met him, and we became friends. He invited me back to their place in Kansas City for a Thanksgiving meal. There's 12 kids in that family, and so the first time meeting the family, I couldn't have told you which one was Rachel or anything.
They look so much alike.
Yeah, that's right. 6 girls, 6 boys, and so we definitely met at that time. I became friends with the whole family, and our families became friends to where I would go on trips out to Kansas City just to visit the family. Some of them would come up to Ravencrest because Mark had worked there, and before that, her dad had been a student at Ravencrest one of the first years that Ravencrest was a school back in the late 70s. And so, that's how we met. But really, and there's a whole story, of course, the journey up until where where we started dating while I was on staff. But it is funny how the Lord works, because I remember distinctly my first year on staff at Timberline thinking, okay, not that I had any prospects really in mind, but I just felt like, okay, I'm this first year on staff, I had never dated up until that time. And I just had it in my mind, I'm definitely not going to date this first year on staff. I'm going to focus on why I'm here and what I'm doing. And the Lord said, nope. About halfway through my first year, He made it clear, this girl back in Kansas City that you've kind of had in the back of your mind, you've had in your heart for a number of years, it's time to start pursuing her.
Okay. And what year was that?
That was 2012.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you guys got married what year?
We got married in December of 2013.
Okay.
So, yeah, I called her dad December 1st, 2012. And then we basically started dating after that, dated for 9 months, engaged for 3 months. And then we got married halfway through my second school year here.
Okay.
Yeah.
5 kids down the road.
5 kids deep, yeah.
That's great. And it's a real precious family. It's just fun to watch the kids and how they associate with each other. You guys as parents, and then within the community, how they just, they're just very much a part of what's going on, which is, growing up as a kid in Torchbearers, that's a pretty, it's a great environment, for the kids to grow up in.
Yeah, I always remember my dad saying that when he was on staff at Ravencrest with a young family, like I have now here, I do remember him saying that at the end of the year, so many students would come up to him and say, thank you, Wayne. But they wouldn't be thanking him for his teaching or all the time he put into administrating the school or the program. Most of the time, they were thanking him for being a father and being a husband in an environment where they could observe it and see what it is to lead a family in a Christ-like way and to raise your kids. And so, Rachel and I think and talk about that often, is like, we don't want our kids to be a burden here or a distraction. We don't want to take advantage of the opportunity the Lord's given us, but we also recognize that a lot of these students come from broken homes, and they don't know what a whole and healthy and Christ-centered family looks like, or a Christ-centered marriage looks like. And we feel blessed that the Lord has given that to us. And so, yeah, I think about like just walking down here to meet with you to start the podcast. I walked through the dining room, and there's two of my kids at the dining room table with two students, and the students are drawing with them. And then my oldest son was out back on the deck playing cornhole with another student. And it's a gift to us, and I pray that it's a gift to these students. Rach and I feel passionate about trying to share with these students. So many of these students, and I'm sure the audience of this podcast being alumni, many of them, they're facing these things of I'm in a relationship, or I'm engaged, or I'm married, or I've started having kids, and learning how to apply all the truths that we've known or learned and try to actually apply them in a new situation, in a new marriage, with a new baby. And we feel passionate about allowing the Lord to use us in whatever way He wants to teach that message in the context of marriage and family.
It's sobering, isn't it, to think that, people are watching you.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. It's amplified in a setting like this, but I think it's true generally in the world.
Yeah.
People are watching, and it's good for us to be reminded of that, and to be aware that we often say that I want to preach Christ in word or in deed. And often I think sometimes we say that as almost a cop out. I want to say, I'm not good at speaking, so I want to say it with how I live. But are we really conscious of that? Are we really looking to the Lord in prayer about that? Because I think we need to live purposefully. And that doesn't mean like, sit down and have your checklist of how many correct parental activities I want to be involved in today. But to be in prayer, Lord, I need your wisdom for this. This is what you've laid before me. You've made me a husband. You've made me a dad. And so I need your wisdom for this. I'm trusting you for this, and I'm going to love my wife. I'm going to love my kids, trusting you, not me. And I think that we need to encourage each other to think through that and to purposefully go to the Lord with that. And so, it seems like so many things at a Torchbearer Center, everything is amplified.
The fishbowl effect.
Yeah, we're in a fishbowl. We are, and it is amplified, but it's only an amplification of what is normal, what is going on everywhere. And so, for the listener to be aware of that, the people are watching you. If you claim that you are a believer, then people are watching.
That's right.
And so, be reminded, people are watching. I need Jesus, and look to Him, trust Him. That's great. Well, something that I know that you've had to deal with, and if you don't feel like talking about it, don't worry about it. But you had to go through the loss of one of your own siblings. And that was, you're not old now, but she was so young. And a mother, she was really at a time where she was, I think, starting to really blossom as a believer. And all of a sudden, her life is gone. And she had children. What was that like for you to lose a sister? What did the Lord have to do in your heart with all that?
It's, I think, 7 years ago, or coming up on 7 years, that her physical body died. And as my dad would say, she moved to heaven, got her citizenship, claimed her citizenship there. Um, when you start, when you ask the question, or when I knew where you were going pretty quickly with that, it's interesting even to observe in myself. I started cracking a smile because, of course, there is pain associated with it, and there were some dark days, but I can't help but smile now because, for many reasons. One, because she's moved to heaven, and it's like somebody that you love has gone on a long trip, and you're not going to see him for a while, but then you'll see him, and it will be like that time was. I remember sitting on the couch, kind of as a family, knowing Rachel's terminal diagnosis, and talking through, how are we going to walk through this as a family and stay intact. And I remember somebody in the group, it might have been her husband, Mark, saying, when we look back on this 100,000 years from now, it's the perspective of that is going to be so different than what we feel and know now. And so, we already talked a little bit about experiencing joy in the trials. Yeah. And for me, I haven't experienced that many trials in my life. I would say that losing my sister, or losing my sister's physical life on earth to cancer, is kind of the biggest trial, and one of the only trials that I've faced up to date. And it was hard. And I would say, I talk with the students about what it is to have joy in trials when we talk through 1 Thessalonians together. And it's, in some ways, it's a mystery until you experience it, until you actually go through it, and you apply the truth of God's word to your life. You take him at his word, and you lean into him, and you believe that what he says is true, that what he says is possible, that you can experience his joy in the middle of life's darkest circumstances, and then you see it's real. You can believe it before you go through a trial. But it's like Job said, he talks about, I had heard about you at the hearing of my ears, but now I know you, and to know the truth in your heart or in your mind, and then after going through something that hard, to just know it in your heart, to know it in your experience, that God is good to his word, and when he says that you can experience joy and have hope in the middle of life's darkest circumstances, that you can take God at his word. And so, we didn't do everything right. I would say I probably lost a year of my prayer life following Rachel's death, because one of the things that we talked about, she was given, I think she was given 6 months to live initially, and ended up living 2 years. And for about 2 years, the big emphasis was prayer. We're praying for her healing, for God to take the cancer away. And we were praying, our friends were praying, our extended family. Rachel developed a big network on social media of people, that was thousands of people that were rooting for her, praying for her. And yet the cancer beat her body, and her body died. And for me, the carnage, in my spiritual life was that my prayer life suffered, because I just thought, why would I pray if the Lord's already determined it? He knows what's going to happen. He's set it in motion. What's the point of praying? And that was maybe the area of my life that suffered the most. And the Lord drew me back to himself, back to prayer after a year, and he taught me through his word that he does somehow there is this mystery that exists, but it's a reality that that somehow our prayers interact with His divine purpose, and that He does respond in this world, in our timeline, to our prayers, and we get to participate in what He's doing through prayer. But I lost about a year of my prayer life. But what I didn't lose was my hope and my joy. And I would say our family as a whole, God proved that truth as a reality in our lives. And I think it was a lot through prayer. Like, that's what God brought me to after a year of kind of grief. God showed me, actually, I did answer your prayers. I didn't heal her body in this world. She's healed now.
Yeah.
She's got a new body.
Yeah.
But I didn't, I've answered your prayers not by healing her physical body on earth, but actually to pour out my grace on your life through your prayers and other people's prayers, that you should experience my joy, that you should not lose hope in the midst of that time. And so looking back now, I can say, man, our family, we can say we know what it is to have joy in the middle of that trial and following that trial. And we've not lost hope and lost heart. And Paul says in 1 Thessalonians that he wanted to send Timothy to them when they were in the midst of trials so that they wouldn't be shaken by the affliction that they were experiencing. And at that time for them, they were being, persecuted, stoned, and even martyred for their faith. Paul says, I sent encouragement to you that you wouldn't be shaken by these afflictions. And for me, I can say I was shaken up a little bit in my prayer life. But as a whole, I was encouraged and held fast. Really, the Lord held fast to us to bring us through that with joy and hope. So it was a mixed experience, a mixed bag. But like I said, when I think about it now, seeing the ways that God has redeemed it, it's a crazy story what happened after that. Rachel left behind 3 young girls and her husband, and since then, her husband, after a year or so of grief and really being in a place where he never wanted to remarry, he just wanted to raise the girls in the Lord. The Lord brought along another godly woman who just happens to be my wife's sister. They've now been married for a number of years, and they have 5 more babies, 5 more girls actually.
Wow.
And so it's just amazing the way that the Lord doesn't always spare us from the pain of circumstances, but if we let Him, He will always redeem the situation and bring life and healing.
I've thought about that, the last couple of years, that you're still, to these kids, very much so, you're still Uncle Joseph.
I'm a second time Uncle Joseph.
And to all of their younger siblings, you're they all share that, and how the Lord does things like that. So just to close our time here, I would like to ask you one more question. You talked about the struggle that was yours after the death of your sister, with regards to praying, and how it was a year-long struggle, and the Lord brought you through it. How would you answer the question that, I wouldn't be surprised if you get the question, because it is a common question. Joseph, what is prayer?
Yeah, such an important question, I think. And it's something the Lord's been working in me for years, even after that year of kind of challenge in my own life with prayer. But I think it relates so clearly to the context that we're in, that I'm in at Timberline, and that we're in with Torchbearers, and a context where we talk so constantly about the life of Christ, the activity of Christ, and the strength of Christ on our behalf. He is the initiator and he is the sustainer. And you can be left with the question of, well, what is my role? What do I do? If Christ is all of these things to me, then I'm sure that I'm not supposed to just sit on the couch, eat potato chips, and play video games. Like, there is some way in which I am a participator, an active participant, where all of me is actually participating in what God is doing. But what is the nature of that participation? And so for me, as the Lord healed my prayer life, He actually also revealed to me that prayer is really the key that turns, or the hinge that turns the door of entering into the living of the life of Christ. Because prayer is our fellowship with Christ, and it's through fellowship with Christ that we can experience and know and practically, moment by moment, walk in the Spirit and allow His strength to be strong on our behalf, and to allow the things He initiates to draw us to walk in them. You know, He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. But we are Christ's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works that He prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. And so it's I would say, and I have found in my own life, that it is my prayer life that is the key to entering into walking in the Spirit.
Okay.
Without prayer, without that fellowship with Christ, I will walk in the flesh. In prayer and in fellowship with Christ, I can walk in the Spirit into the good works that He's prepared for me.
I feel like that's what Paul is encouraging us with when he says pray without ceasing.
Yeah.
You know, that this is, it's an attitude of our heart, and it is a practical, it is practically where we are, given the opportunity to abide.
Yeah.
And to come in line with Him, to be with Him, in fellowship with Him. I think that's really well said. I appreciate that, and I also appreciate you spending this time. I know this is work time for you, so you've had to take some time out to come do this. So thanks for doing that. Thanks for spending some time with me.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. Thanks for having me.
You bet.
You've been listening to the His Hill podcast, featuring our host, Kelly Doherty, and Joseph Weissman, the Assistant Director at one of our sister schools, Timberline Lodge in Fraser, Colorado. Thank you so much for tuning in with us this week. Our students returned from spring break on Sunday and began classes again on Monday morning. Everything has fallen back into rhythm very quickly, and it has been such a joy to have the students back again on campus. There are 8 weeks left in the semester before our students graduate and summer staff training begins. Please be praying for the hearts of the students these last 2 months, that they would let God be God and let Him work in them what He sees fit. The school year isn't over yet. There is still so much that He has yet to reveal. We serve a gracious and kind God and praise Him for the time left in the school year for that truth to be seen and learned more and more. Once again, you've been listening to the His Hill podcast, featuring our host, Kelly Doherty, along with Joseph Weissman. Remember to keep your eyes fixed on Christ. He is the way, the truth, and the life. I'm Lizzie, and we'll see you next week.